So what's the best way to cut roof tiles? Now, us Aussies, we do things differently to everyone else in the world. Most other roofers around the world would use a cutting tool.
Concrete or clay tiles, we're going to be using a grinder. This is a 4-inch grinder. You can also use a skill saw. Really anything with a diamond tip blade. So anything that's made to cut concrete or masonry you can use. We like to use grinders as they're a little bit easier to maneuver, but you can also use a skill saw. And we're just going to cut this. Again, it doesn't need to be a perfect cut because all your cuts are generally going to be covered under your hips and under your ribs.
Now, Australian tilers do things completely different. We have the HYTILE machine.
The way of cutting your tile without using a spitting blade or electricity. Do is set the tile between the wheel and the chisel and begin tapping. And there you go. After a few seconds, I'm almost all the way done. Maybe a couple nicks that I can clean up, but other than that, perfect. We have a beautifully cut valley in just a few seconds with our HYTILE roof tile cutter.
Now, if you know how to use the HYTILE machine, it's a very quick way to cut tiles. So on Australian roofs, I'd say 95% of tiles are cut using the HYTILE machine.
The first method is by using a traditional roof tile cutting machine.
Now, for an experienced Aussie roofer, the HYTILE machine produces a very quick, clean cut. And the obvious advantage is there is no dust and there is no noise. And you can do a fairly neat cut at the valleys. So the valleys on Australian roofs look just like this. Now, how would this valley look if you use a blade, a cutting blade on a grinder? You can spot the difference if you look hard. The HYTILE cut on a valley looks pretty good, and it does the job for 95% of Australian roofs. So what's the advantage of using a blade on a roof? Now, we've got a roof here where instead of the HYTILE cutter, the roofers use a grinder. And the reason we got to look at this roof was because there was a leak that I think started ever since the roof got laid. And over time, the leak got worse. So when we opened the roof up, you could see at the valley where all the battens have started to rot. And the mystery is, why is this roof leaking? The tile around the skylight has been cut to fit around the skylight. A nice, neat cut. But obviously the roof tiler didn't understand how water worked, and the tile at the corner of the skylight wasn't cut properly. If you look closely, you can see there's a gap. And water just runs down off one tile into the gap, onto the sarking, and started to rot the battens. So the question is, how should this roof tiler had cut this tile? Now, if the roofer only had access to the HYTILE machine, he would have had a lot of difficulties trying to cut this tile correctly. So in this instance, the blade is the smartest way to cut this roof tile. So this tile here should have been cut to maintain the upstream reach so that the water would not trickle backwards over the top of the tile, just like this. And the trick is to maintain the integrity of the roof tile so that it doesn't leak. So the smart Aussie roofers use both tools, predominantly the HYTILE cutter, and every now and then we've got to pull out the grinder with the masonry disc and do the little bit of detail that makes sure that roofs don't leak.